some new balance changes are coming to Uma Musume on the 1st of July, so right after Champions Meeting. Now, I know that I'm not the first one, and I probably won't be the last one to go over these updates, but I did go out of my way to try and find some specific examples of things like the bond update levels, as well as some actual visual examples of the race mechanics, especially that new power exceeding the cap mechanic. So if you want to see some of those, this is the video for you. Now, some of these changes will change how races fundamentally work, some changes affect how you train your Umas too, and some changes are just nice to have. Honestly though, at the end of the day, this probably doesn't change fundamentally how you play the game. At the end of the day, you still want to just win races, get max stats where possible, and so on and so forth. However, these changes will hopefully make you more likely to win races that you may have lost due to some annoying system mechanics. Let us start off though with one of the most important changes, and that is, to me at least, the Bond 11 and Bond 12 being introduced for the following Umas. Not all of them, but some of them, with more to come as the game progresses. By reaching Bond 11, you will now unlock the Uma's casual outfits for use on the home screen and in live concerts. And then reaching Bond 12 will get you 50 carats. As an FYI, to get to Bond 11, it takes 1,600 Bond points, which is the same amount that it takes to go from Bond 9 to Bond 10. Completing a career run gives roughly 15 Bond points, and in team trials, winning the race gives that Uma 2 Bond points or 1 on a loss. Now, technically speaking, since you can raise up to 15 bonds at once in team trials, spamming those are technically speaking the best way to build up multiple bonds at once, so do keep that in mind if you want to try and min-max unlocking outfits. Now, you're probably wondering though, what about my Oshi though? She wasn't included in this patch? What about my casual outfit? Well, the nice thing is that actually, starting from this new patch, if you have an Uma at Bond 10 and they don't have their higher bond levels unlocked yet, you will be able to bank the bond points in the background, up to 5,000 to be specific, so that when their bond limit is eventually increased, that reserve of points will be used to instantly level them up. So even if your Oshi isn't a part of this first batch, you can still prepare for it in the future. Next up though are the adjusted race mechanics. These are arguably one of the things that will affect everyone the most, although indirectly, just because of how annoying some of these mechanics were when they happened. The first is with regards to running solo fronts. If there is only one frontrunner in a lobby, and I mean a regular front, not a runaway, before, that lone frontrunner was basically useless. They didn't really establish a meaningful lead from the rest of the runners. But after the update, this lone frontrunner will now sort of act like a runaway from the rest of the pack. Before the update, a lone front would try to maintain a 4.5 meter lead from the other runners, but after the update, they will now try to maintain a 12.5 meter lead, almost 3 times the distance. Now, it's not as big of a gap compared to actual runaways that try to maintain a whopping 17.5 meter lead from the next runner, but it is at least significantly better than before. That being said though, running 2 fronts is still going to be the more effective strategy, as they will both push each other forward constantly throughout the entire race. But at least now a lone frontrunner is no longer as useless as before. Then for the non-frontrunner spots, the next change is for position keep, specifically for pace down mode. Pace down is when your Uma pushes up further ahead than what you would expect, for their running style at least. And then in trying to correct this, they would slow down. This has led to many instances where your Uma will push forward and then slam the brakes so hard that they actually end up in a worse position than where they were before moving up. That's because before, pace down would force your Uma speed to be hit by a 0.915 multiplier, slowing them down by almost 10%, which is devastating, especially on shorter tracks where it's harder to make up for that loss of position. However, after the update, the multiplier will now only be a 0.945 speed multiplier. So your Umas will still slow down, but not by as much. Now, as a friendly reminder though, you can negate pace down entirely while your Uma is currently under the effect of a velocity increasing skill. This is why you would see stuff like End Closer Goldship with Daring Strike just constantly creeping up from the back of the race non-stop, not slowing down at all, because she is ignoring pace down thanks to her velocity skills. Speaking of end closes though, another new race mechanic being introduced, which is the opposite of pace down, is pacing up. This is going to be a brand new mechanic where after the update, if your Uma is overtaken by someone who they should be ahead of because of things like styles, then they will receive a 2x target speed modifier. Now, again, this doesn't mean that they will speed up and that they will overtake the other Uma, but they will try to. Again, it's a target speed modifier, not a current speed modifier. This is a great change though, as it will at least mean that your Umas will try to fight back to maintain their positions if they are overtaken by others. This means then that hopefully they can still activate their position dependent skills. An obvious example of this would be late surges, specifically on those longer distances races, where they would always end up getting swallowed by the swarm of end closers pushing ahead of them. Or alternatively, let's say you have a pace chaser with shooting for victory, but then they get overtaken by some of the late surgers, pushing them down to like 5th or 6th. Now, at least, they will try to get back into position, which will get them back into a position where they can potentially activate Shooting for Victory. The other race adjustment that was made was with regards to one other change that was mentioned about how stats exceeding 1200 would affect an Uma during the race. This is very likely referring to the Ashi wo Tameru, or the accumulated power system, as it is called on the Japanese server, which they got at the 1.5 anniversary. This is for when you have over 1200 power, which can be done through mood and green skills. The TLDR of this though is that having excess power leads to increased acceleration at the start of the final spurt of the race. I know, more power equals more acceleration. Not exactly a groundbreaking new mechanic. Right now, it'll be kind of difficult to see the benefits of this, especially since we are still capped at 1200 base power. But I want to show an example here of what this will eventually become. Here we have 3 Maruzenskis. My dream scenario, actually. One has just over 1200 power, so basically they don't really get any bonus from this accumulated power. That is going to be our control, and that is going to be the Maruzenski in the middle. Then the Maruzenski on the left has 1500 power, which will be our Uma to show off the new mechanic, and the last Maruzenski is the one on the right position, and that one actually has under cap power. But she does have Nimble Navigator, a white acceleration that provides a 0.2 acceleration increase. And as you'll see in the video here, although the activation timing on the skill isn't exactly the same as the timing for the accumulated power acceleration, the 1500 power Maruzenski and the 1100 power with Nimble Navigator are accelerating at a similar rate. So having an excess of 300 power is equivalent to a single white acceleration skill. Obviously, the more power you have, the better, and the less power you have, the less impactful this is. But again though, when you're training, ideally you want your power as high as possible anyway, without sacrificing other stats. So this is more of just something to keep in mind in the background, and not really something that you should try to focus on aiming to achieve. By the way, the green little bubble that popped up in that race was for dueling. That was not the activation of the bonus acceleration. There's no little pop-up to tell you what happens, you just kind of see it happen. And one last little minor change to the races is that a lot of the courses, save for about 4 of them, have had the lengths of the corners and straightaways adjusted ever so slightly, just so that they can match the real-life racetracks. So, Keiba enjoyers, rejoice. It's now lore-accurate racetracks. Otherwise though, that is it for the in-game race changes. Next up are the skill-based changes. Now, firstly, in the update details, they do mention, quote-unquote, certain skill conditions and their effects, which is kind of broad, so it's hard to say what exactly will be adjusted, since there could be some 1.5 anniversary changes or even some second-year anniversary changes brought through early. Now, as a reminder, a lot of the changes that we would have gotten now in this patch, we actually did receive earlier on way back in that big November patch. So for example, the leniency on the activation requirements of some skills. Or a great example is, for example, Mile Maven and the Taiki Shuttle Shooting for Victory stuff. Those were all things that we got way earlier in advance, so if you do look up some Japanese patch notes, just know that not all of the skills mentioned there would be what we are getting now, because we already have them actually. However, that being said though, one skill to keep an eye out for, if it is changed, would be a change to Straightaway Recovery or the gold version Breath of Fresh Air. Because at the 2nd anniversary, this skill was changed so that instead of activating on a random straightaway, which would include right out of the gate or moments before the finish line, it will now specifically activate during the mid-race straightaway, making it much more consistent. Otherwise though, there are a lot of potential 1.5 and 2nd year anniversary changes, but of the skills that they did mention by name, so we know they are getting adjusted, are all of the debuffs that rely on rushed Umas, so Trick as well as the frenzied debuffs. Before, these could activate when any Uma was rushed, including your own, which would be a waste since if they triggered like that, then this would likely not hit any of the opposing Umas. But after the update though, they will now only trigger when specifically an opponent's Uma is rushed. So you know that you will at least be hitting somebody with them. However, at the end of the day, gambling on your opponent's Umas to be rushed in order to hit them with a debuff is still not exactly a reliable idea. Unless apparently you're racing against me, in which case it's almost a guaranteed hit on all 3 of my Umas. The other specific skill mentioned by name is OG Gold City's unique skill, Keep It Real. Before, it would be an acceleration that would activate in the second half of the race. This would be a pretty bad skill because it has a chance to activate in the middle of the race, where you don't really need the acceleration. However, after the update, it gets changed from an acceleration to a velocity boost, starting from the second half of the race, while positioned from 4th to 6th. This is way better, and I know what everyone is thinking, oh, it's like a late Surger gold ship, which you're not wrong, but again, there is still that very fine requirement of being 4th through 6th, so it's still not exactly the most reliable, and there is the danger that this pushes her so far up that she loses stuff like moving past and beyond, or let's pump some iron. Honestly, a better description of this would be for the Major Bright fans out there, her new unique is similar to Major Bright's, since it is a mid-pack requirement. Then next up are the in-career changes. There are 3 things to take note of in this update. The first change is with regards to date events after recreation, the other is a small stat adjustment during career events, and then the last is a consistency buff for group cards. The easy thing to cover is the career events first, as this is going to be an adjustment for just the New Year stat gain options. Technically speaking, this would have included a lot of the other Uma career-specific events, but remember, we got a lot of those in the November 11th update. But otherwise though, on the 1st of July, when it comes to the New Year events, once the update arrives, during Classic Year, instead of one stat being increased by 10 points, it will now be increased by 25 points. And in Senior Year, instead of getting +5 to all stats, you will get +8 to all stats. Then next up are the increased rates for outings. These are any of those events related to after hitting recreation. So whether that be the little stat boost event that you get on the way back from your recreation, or the crane game events, these will now be changed so that you will get these events whenever you come back from recreation without fail. Unless of course you are on a turn where there is some sort of scenario related event, like say the end of the year, like December or something like that. Now there is going to be a limit though, and you can only get up to 5 of these outing events per run. And then the last change is with regards to the pure passion effect that you get with group support cards, like Team Sirius or the upcoming Thrones Assemblage. This change is going to be an all-around consistency buff, with the effect, Pure Passion, being less likely to be removed as turns go on, and also increasing the chances of the group card to actually appear during training when you have the Pure Passion buff. And then the chances of actually getting the event to trigger Pure Passion has also been improved too. All around, just good improvements to see more rainbows out of Pure Passion with your group cards. And then lastly, probably the most important part of this update, and the thing that might actually change how you play the game, is the change to how Affinity works. Firstly, the easiest thing to go over is that for Haru Urara, her base affinities have been increased with other Umas. So for the Urara Oshi players, rejoice! King Halo went from 13 affinity to 23 affinity. Yippee. It's still not as high as some other Umas, but it's at least something now, right? Then the other big change is for how affinity is calculated when selecting legacies. The TLDR though is that now only your G1 wins will count for affinity, no G2 and no G3 races. To compensate for this though, the G1 wins will count for more. This is nice for several reasons. Assuming you are the type of player to actually care about making parents, which I realize isn't really everyone, but even if you aren't somebody that goes and makes parents, you will still likely benefit from this change though. Firstly, since G2 and G3 races are no longer calculated for affinity, you don't have to feel as bad about losing these races if you are doing a parent run. Now all that matters are those G1 races. So for the frontrunners that lose the Niigata stakes in junior year, it's okay. Don't waste a clock on it. It's fine. It won't matter. Second, matching your parents with a borrow's parents to make sure that they have won the same races for affinity is much easier now, since you only have to take into account the G1 races, which for the most part, almost everyone will have these similar races done, because there's only so many G1s you can do. You don't have to stress about making sure that you ran the same bum-ass Kinko show race during like classic year late October just to get that extra point of affinity. And then third, honestly, depending on how many races you were doing on your parent runs beforehand, this might actually be a net positive in terms of the affinity on your parents. Assuming of course you still at least ran mostly G1 races. A lot of the affinity maxing was by shoving in extra G2 and G3 races. Now, technically speaking, somebody that ran like 50 races, with half of those being G2 and G3s, is almost on par with somebody that ran 25 specifically G1 races. Now, how does this change parent farming? Honestly, it technically doesn't. At the end of the day, you still want to go into Track Blazer and win a lot of races for skill hints and skill points, and aim for a high career rank. At least until we get a potential revamped URA, or new RA if you would like to call it that, since we will get some new scenario skills in URA there, similar to how Unity gave us ignited skills. However, if you want to make the best possible parents in terms of affinity, now you are instead trying to make sure that your parent runs include as many G1 wins as possible. This includes trying to get them to run dirt races if they can. Now, of course, as time goes on, making Umas run every G1 possible isn't going to be so simple, whether it be because of their innate aptitudes or their career-specific races. So, for those of you dedicated enough though, what you can do is work on some great grandparents. Umas that can innately run nearly every G1 possible, or at least maximize it so that they can run a G1 race whenever one does show up, including the dirts. And then these will serve as a sort of base plate of maximum affinity for whatever grandparent you decide to use them with. These will be Umas like Pasa, Ogre Cap, Agnes Digital, Inari 1, Gold City, and what else have you. That way you can have them win all of the G1 races so that no matter what, and no matter who else you use as a grandparent afterwards, they will almost assuredly have G1 wins in common with this great grandparent. As an example, let's say you want to make a grandparent Rudolph so that you can potentially inherit Behold the Divine Emperor's Might. In order to maximize the affinity by running similar races as, say, an El Condor Pasa grandparent, Rudolph would need the Dirt and Mile Sparks to increase this. So, ideally, that great grandparent Pasa got Dirt and Mile Sparks. It doesn't matter if the final racer that you want needs medium sparks. Again, the great grandparent sparks won't appear on the tree at all. But this will give Rudolph the maximum possible affinity as a grandparent. And then assuming all 4 other grandparents also did the same thing, so they ran every single race possible with Dirt and Mile aptitudes, while still somehow miraculously getting the correct aptitude for the actual resulting race, then you will be sitting with a lot of affinity. Otherwise though, that is pretty much all of the changes that you can expect on the 1st of July. Again, realistically speaking, a lot of these changes won't really affect you directly as a player in terms of how you play the game. At the end of the day, the aim of the game is still going to be to just get lucky during training, to get good stats and skills, and win races of course. However, for those of you that are invested enough in making good parents, to try and improve that luck in stats and skills, I guess you've got some homework to do now with those affinity changes. Of course, when the update does actually arrive, we could get a nice surprise similar to what happened with the November 11th update. Maybe we'll get some evolved skills early. Or could you imagine we get Spark rerolls? All I know is that the most important part of this is going to be the inclusion of the casual outfits. Whose casual outfit are you going to be looking for first? And what is the most exciting thing that you see in the upcoming patch? Honestly, for me, the most exciting thing is the fix to the pace down mechanic. The number of times I've seen my Umas just slam on the brakes. Oh boy. That and of course the outfits, although to be fair, 1,600 points is a lot. Again, that's like 100 runs, effectively speaking, on an Uma to get them up to Bond 11 now. So it'll take a while, but slowly but surely it'll get there. There's actually a Japanese comment that described it, and they said that it takes around roughly 3 to 4 months, at least according to them. Now, there was that one time where we had double Bond points, and we all sort of wrote it off as like, who cares about that? Now, honestly, I kind of want that double 1 point event to come back. If anything, that is where you should be spamming those carrot jellies in team trials to try and max out as many bonds as possible. Otherwise though, like I said, whose casual outfit are you looking forward to the most? And what is the most exciting thing to you in this update? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, I hope you all have good luck in your CMs and a good rest of your day. Until next time though, bye bye.